Good morning. So I'm up early. It's 1:30 a.m. and unable to sleep, and partially because I woke up with the reflections and the recap of Dark Age of Man, Chronicle 4, Saints and Sinners, on my mind. And once I woke up in these reflections, is why I do these post game, right? Player recaps and reflections. Um, I realized I wasn't going to be able to go back to sleep until I talked about this, until I voiced this. So first of all, I want to thank Sam for running. Uh, I would say probably the most enlightening uh, sessions for me as a player in my own game, but certainly uh, yesterday was a remarkable exposure of what our game can be and what I had not dared think it would work at such a level. And Sam is fantastic, of course, but this particular session did so many things with our game system, Dark Age of Man, the role playing game, that we knew theoretically could be done, and we knew worked because we've had bits of it. But this was just a master class. I would say both in how Dark Age of Man can a role playing game can do a thing, but also how there can be epic high fantasy juxtaposed to our mortal minions on terra firma, so to speak. Okay. So again, Saint Sinners Chronicle 4 is the Chronicles of Janus of London the Merchant, which is my character, and Brother Boethus, which is Dell's character, a simple monk from the Dredgewater Abbey, had grown up. So I'll give you a little backstory for this to make sense. Boethus had grown up really under the tutelage of Father Falcone. He is the head of the church in Dredgewater from the book. So in our book, we give these NPCs and Father Falcone. Nobody's defined as what kind of people they are, whether they're good or evil, or whether they're just characters in the setting. But Falcone in my chronicles became, in a way, again, because everything is naive narrators, so we don't know who Father Falcone's going to be when the game starts. Father Falcone becomes something that I utilize in juxtaposition to the player characters. So if Sam comes to town as his bishop, as his brother Ethelwald, and he exerts upon Dredgewater a particular type of Christian, I can either make Falcone his ally or I can make Falcone his enemy. And I chose to make Falcone his enemy. We didn't have to make it any deeper than that. And because we're naive, from that, Falcone could end up being a greater evil in the whispering in the ear of Lady Washburn in our chronicles to become the man who must be routed from Dredgewater as they get the great. They save Dredgewater from the whispering anti-Christian, so to speak, a Christian who doesn't act, a Christian who doesn't actually act in the uh, best ideals of what you'd think a Christian would be. Ultimately, whispering in the ears of the Lady Washburn, and runs into Brother Ethelwald. The games are about the players. The games are about the players' characters and how they are in a world that exists, and their characters become our chronicles, our centerpiece. These are stories of Conan. The world exists outside of Conan. The world has its own realities, its own wants, its own desires, but we're not following the world. We're following Conan as he makes his way, surviving and putting his mark upon the world. That's why we're playing with these characters. That's why we're reading these books. That's why we're watching these movies. That's why we're telling these tales. That's why they chronicle the stories of men and women in the history of the world. They become mythology. They become these things, right? Okay. So our game sets out to do what many role playing games claim to do. centerpiece, the characters. Our game actually says we're going to make a game and we're going to set up a setting. We're going to set up a system that allows the player characters to have true agency. And they then begin their play. Okay. So we meet in Sam's Chronicles, we meet Brother Boethius, who has been raised by Falcone and has had to deal with Bishop Aethelwald coming from another place and ultimately having performed miracles that he denies. He sees he sees Bishop Aethelwald, who has now been made the prominent from brother to bishop of Dredge County, Dredgewater, and having performed miracles, he doesn't believe it, and he ultimately, and again, Adele does not say this out loud. He projects who his character is in the world, right? What his character believes, thinks, or feels may or may not impact play, and may or may not show up in play for the greater world to understand. Those are Dell's internal motives. But the realities are he was tuteled. He was under the tutelage of Falcone. So Falcone, and his way, his particular Christian way, was how Brother Boethius viewed the world. And we don't know this until session 3, when Dell reveals his true alliance with Falcone and his disregard for now the visions of Bishop Aethelwald as a potential saint, as he has been crucified by Falcone out of session, offset, so to speak, right? So the 4th session, the final chronicle in Janus and Brother Boethius' life, is in multi-tiered gaming. How do I say this? So what Sam does is show adroitly how Dark Age of Man, the role-playing game, can be both epic high fantasy and still grounded in our characters, very mortal, in the mud, in the muck, minor role players in an epic battle for the very existence of Dredge Town and Dredgewater and the Washburn family in an epic Dark Ages battlefield, juxtaposed to a more epic high fantasy struggle between good and evil, God and the fallen angel, right? Meanwhile, this battle that our lowly human beings are involved in on a micro level, on the ground, these moments in battle, then macro out. Again, I talked when I wrote the game, when I developed the game, I wanted the system to support macro or micro narrative, macro or micro moments, so we could have macro moments that could tell an entire battle in the dice roll, or we could drill into micro, into the foot soldier in combat, your characters or whatever. But because of the way our game works mechanically and so fluidly through narrative, we can also juxtaposition the epicness of our lowly minion's ability to cast, in a way, great power, magic, so to speak. We can macro out to see how that grand power is affecting the micro world, the micro narrative. And we have done it. I have done it, certainly locally, and I've done it, but not on the level that Sam displayed to me personally as a developer of my own game. How perfectly, beyond my expectations of how this could happen in our game, of how this could actually happen. Sam actually showed me how we could go from this macro high fantasy narrative with the same characters at this technically our repute levels are 5, which makes us mid-level characters. 10 is the highest repute. 3 is how you start the game. I think we're 5 or 6 repute, respectively. But because our game is couched in low magic, dark ages, history, etc., but there can be this epic high fantasy element, right? Which is, for the most part, for the lack of a better term, it's the closest thing to a Lord of the Rings type of moment than I've ever had in gaming or ever will have, because almost all traditional role-playing games, for these types of scenarios to unfold, we have to be playing high-level gaming. You would be high-level characters uh, dealing with high level magic and godlike powers and godlike vulnerabilities, or I should say invulnerabilities. Well, that isn't how our game will function, and it's not how our game is designed to function. And we can be human beings in a historical battle or a minor battle, and we can call upon through words of power, as Sam rightly shows yesterday, invoking as my character invokes the name of Saint Ethelwald. In many ways, because I do it, and I do it in such a narrative framework that it is actually bringing about a high fantasy element of a god on the battlefield representing our army versus the fallen angel Falcone representing the enemy, and more importantly, on the next level, and I'll get to this. This again, this was multi-tiered for me. Um, this session was really about the battle for the soul of brother Boethus, and this is where Dark Age of Man shines, because it was always about our players, it's always about our characters, but it turned out to be an epic high fantasy god-like battle, but also involving what turned out to be an epic historic battle for the very existence of Dredgewater, uh, and how that is further made evident by Sam's epilogue description of what all of this ended up becoming, which was genius. We got to see how mortal men, mortal players, are involved in epic historic battles, but that also have epic mythology. And the mythology, of course, in our game happens to be couched in this particular battle, was couched in Christian versus Christian, right? Uh, uh, the false prophet versus the real prophet. So this particular Chronicles of Sam's was a perfect second Chronicles to our Chronicles, as my game sets it more of a political and very human element of famine and starvation, issuing of pogroms against the pagans, in which they were legally allowed to, made pagans in a way illegal, and therefore it was a very human, very down, low, dirty, with some moments of miracles that Ethelwald committed in a very low level way, but yet they were miracles. And so we saw how that played out at that level. And then Sam is the perfect continuation of the story of Dredge County and Dredgewater and this family and our people coming through their lives, our characters coming through their lives. And it takes on an epic scale high fantasy. It is what high fantasy should be. Gandalf was in that battle, and Gandalf was playing at this level, but on the ground were our favorite characters from the books, engaged in life or death struggle, a mortal struggle with swords and shields and arrows. And meanwhile, Gandalf might be using a level of magic to influence battle that is a large swath of high fantasy, right? And so this is what hopefully your fantasy gaming is. This is hopefully what, in a way, your superhero gaming could be, right? Dark Age of Man, our system, our style with naive narrator, where characters first, players have great agency over their characters and over what they're trying to achieve in the world and what they're involved in the world, would allow for great superhero tales, right? In Peter Parker, the lowly Peter Parker, and the trials and tribulations of a teenager's life versus the epic issues he's dealing with as Spider-Man, right? Which are larger than life, which are in a way immortal, in a way way beyond him as a teenager, the problems of a teenager. And that's the juxtaposition that makes superhero comics and superheroes so interesting. Peter Parker has normal trouble, but when it comes right down to it, he's asked to take on responsibilities far, far, far weightier than his even teenage angst can. So how does this work? Because he's very human. He's very human for us all to relate to as we read the comics. But then he takes on larger problems that are much too big for the average person, right? Or the average city or something like that, right? So that's fantasy gaming, right? And that is Lord of the Rings. That is the tells biblical tales. That is mythology in a nutshell. Right? So Sam provides for us a couple of really is a wonderful example of how Dark Age of Man, the role-playing game, functions on a macro narrative to a micro narrative, from macro game to a micro game. So we can go from a macro narrative into a micro narrative, but we can have macro game check, macro game effects, but also micro game effects. And it can happen fluidly in and out of epic investment, down to standing in the mud with a sword and a shield, fighting, calling upon, invoking the Saint Aethelwald, and then how Sam would macro out to tell us the tale of these two images of gods clashing above, in a way, in the sky above the armies. It was very, it even had elements of anime, right? It had very much elements that you would see in a Japanese RPG or an anime, right? Where there's a juxtaposition between the human, the lowly human, and their plight, what they're trying to achieve, and in unison with something grander on an epic level. So everything that was happening to us in the battlefield was ultimately going to affect good or evil. Good or evil was not going to win out without us winning out. I invoke Aethelwald, Boethus, Henry, and I attempt to invoke God. Boethus is trying to invoke God for his Christian army. So we got two competing armies. They're both Christian, right? Boethus believes he's on the right and he has God on his side, and of course, right. So Boethus doesn't yet realize he's in a battle for his soul, right? He has expressed in character enough through our sessions that there is no doubt Boethus is not a good man, right? He is a liar. He is a murderer, but he believes he's doing it all in the name of God. And Sam, really, this Chronicle, this one session was about the real battle for Boethus' soul, and it is a master class in gaming, in my opinion. It is so complicated and multi-tiered, but it's just simple gaming. And it was a brilliant thing to be a part of. It was a great thing to witness. Sam also proved to me, even beyond my own dreams, of how easily you could use our system to have epic high fantasy and it not be about higher level gaming, right? So what happens in role-playing games? Why is magic always such a pain in the ass in role-playing games? Because the games attempt to make literal magic. It attempts to quantify magic via math probabilities. We got to quantify the lightning strike from level 2 to level 12. And so it does so literally by making lightning strike a more devastating 4-6 to a 10-6 roll. It's literal, right? And it's literal because everything is based on probabilities, everything is based on numbers. We math blowed up, hit points blowed up, everything blows up. And the biggest battle with superpowers in a role-playing game, if we're playing superhero games or we're playing high fantasy games, because they are so much couched in this paradigm of math and probabilities, that we have to make literal how magic affects game. Well, our game makes literal the mechanic of how you affect the world and affect each other and affect the game. But it doesn't have to happen based on a sliding scale of power, right? Of math, of probabilities. It happens on a sliding scale of 1 dice, and our attributes or our magical tools, right? Or our attributes. And so it can be a macro epic high fantasy moment, but we are still humans in the Witten discussing with the king how we're going to beat the Vikings. But there can be this epic macro moment in which one of the characters with a spirit of 4 takes a knee and asks everybody to pray for guidance, and it becomes a literal miracle. It becomes a literal effect on play from a lowly brother with a high spirit value in a Witten just counseling the king. And our game allows this fluidity. the simple mechanism and the couching everything in being character centric. Our game is character centric. We ask the presenter to present the world, present the enemies, present the game naively, so characters can be front and center. I got to thank Sam because this has been wonderful just to do play and be these characters. But it is yesterday was indeed special because there was it was just a master class in description and narrative and the macro to micro, the epic to the minor, right? My character in the mud trying to defend Lord Washburn with a sword in this epic battlefield battle, to then the juxtaposition of my invoking Saint Ethelwald's name and how it affected the greater battle, and then to Brother Boethus, how he attempts to run from the battle and get out of this mess. Meanwhile, he is being taunted by, for lack of a better term, Satan to fight for him. And Boethus is finally driven into the mud under great pain and duress as Satan makes him the offer he can't refuse. Do my bidding and the pain will go away. If you don't, it'll be the end of you. And Boethus has that moment where he must decide, who he is. And it's really about the battle for the soul of Boethus, this whole session. Janus had already, in a way, accepted certain truths that he learned through the positive effects upon him in via session, as he has had his -1 body disease healed. And so already my character was already moving toward being a true believer. There was no battle for the soul of Janus in these sessions, except on a normal level, right? Am I a true believer, or am I, right? The miracle itself made Janus a true believer. There was no battle for the soul of Janus, as he was a good man, but he was a secular man. He was a man of money. He was a man of capitalism. He was a man of profit. And summed up in this amazing battle. So we get this historic battle that has both the ramifications of mortal ramifications of Dredgewater versus Howardtown, Lord Washburn versus his aldermen, one Christian versus another Christian, right? And then it has the bigger values, Ethelwald as a saint versus Falcone in the flesh as a demon, so to speak. And then further down are these two characters on both sides. I was actually on the opposite side of Dell. Dell was on the other side. It wasn't about us fighting each other. It was about the battle, in a way, of good versus evil, or Washburn versus Howardtown, etc. So all the tiers were there. The epic battle of good and evil, the battle between Christian men trying to vie for control of the land, all the way down to our characters and our role in the lives of these people. And it was the perfect example of how this occurs as characters in this world that can be very grounded, very real, but then in a flash can take on epic high fantasy elements and epic storytelling, right? Epic narrative, epic description. To sum it up, also unexpected, Sam ties, he does an epilogue, and he tells the epilogue, post Chronicles, of where all of this means. It turns out that Dredgewater ends up being the birthplace of who became Alfred Magnuson, who then moved his capital. He becomes the King of Wessex, and the names of the land change in the King of Wessex. Northwich becomes York. Ireland becomes. So on top of that, Sam does this brilliant as we tell the epilogue, as he tells the epilogue, as this becomes the King of Wessex, this becomes York, this becomes London, this becomes Eastumbria, becomes oh god, I can't remember the three kingdoms. So in the future, we will be with our next set of characters, the next set of chronicles. It will be using the terms and the locales in history, right? So how does Dredgewater become a fictional England and became the England, right? This epic battle became maybe the father, or he actually became, as he goes to meet the Pope, he becomes they canonize Bishop Ethelwald, and he becomes indeed a saint. And Alfred Weswell Washburn is renamed by the Pope Alfred Magna, and he becomes the King of Wessex. And brilliant the way Sam ties this battle into an epic historical battle, makes this a historical moment that our characters happen to be involved in. Brilliant. And then he asks us to tell our epilogue. And I tell the epilogue that Janus would give up his secular life, he would give up his fortune, he would take the vows, and he would undergo a life of vow of poverty and become a monk himself, become a brother. So my character will be in the future, as I won't be playing him, but he will be in our world. He will be brother Janus. He will be a monk. Dale tells the tale of after he survives and has seen the light, so to speak, his soul has been saved. He commits himself to a humble existence, tending the gardens of the Abbey of Dredgewater as just a gardener. Very, he even, I can't remember if he said it exactly, but even a vow of silence. I think he was condemned to a punishment of 1 year of silence, but I think Dell continued that his character would basically continue the vow of silence while he tended the gardens in a very humble existence in pittance for being the sinner that he was, and staying out of the power brokers, avoiding the power broker game of high stakes, right? And we had high stakes gaming. This was high stakes. We were battling for the actual existence of Dredgewater, battling for the existence of the Washburn legacy, Washburn family, which would ultimately become the King of Wessex. We are battling for ourselves mortally, trying not to die, and in many ways battling for our souls. But mostly, Boethus was in a battle for his soul. He was given the opportunity to make the decision, and I live with that, so to speak. Absolutely fantastic. So there was high stakes here. There was low stakes. There was mortal stakes. There was supernatural stakes. There was fantastic. This was a fantastic session. And again, for me, the guy who develops the game and has these ideas and puts them in practice. I actually GM sessions and play sessions, and you don't know what's going to come out of them because you don't sit down to tell an epic tale. You sit down just to be a naive narrator and present the world and the players and kind of their kind of angle of what kind of gaming do they want. It could stay low level where they're robbing banks and they're bandits in the streets and there's nothing epic about it, or it can take on these more larger high fantasy, high stakes games. But I have yet to have this type of session as a presenter. And in all of my gaming as a player, I have never had it as a player. I've never, at any level in any game, have I been able to see what I would call true high fantasy gaming, where we have an epic, we have the Battle of the Gods happening in conjunction, unison, parallel with our battle, with our plights, with our I know that in D&D they could get there, right? You get into level 12 and you're working with the gods. I'm sure there are games that are designed. 13th Age is a game that is designed where even your first level character should be in many ways communicating with his god or asking the gods to play a role. So there are games out there that have a setting that I think the players should be invoking those types of epic high fantasy, high mythology moments. Again, in the handful of games I ran in 13th Age, we never got there. The players just weren't in the mindset, despite what the rules asked of them, they weren't in the mindset to involve the gods, right? Or to be communicating with the gods, so to speak. If I can remember right, 13th Age had an element like that. So for me, it was also a proof that our game does this thing. And it does it without manipulation, and it does it without me doing it. It's one thing for me to say, dude, our game can do that. Let me show you, right? To have somebody else run your game and prove it to you is a pretty watershed experience for me. It's like, well, okay, I always thought it could. I could force it to happen to prove it to somebody, but then it would be forced and it wouldn't be legit, and it would be me manipulating the game to prove it. I have just been a player in a game that somebody else used our system and achieved it better than I ever have, right? The macro narrative, epic, high fantasy element. And then bam, we are within instance. We're in the micro, mortal, clash of arms, and done so well. so well. And again, I got to thank Sam for the opportunity to be a player in a game, but to provide such great fun sessions. We had a great post-mortem conversation again about the experience. Um, and like I said, like in our game, for instance, there was a battle between Christians and pagans, but that was almost secondary to the grander problem of the people starving and the potential for a civil war that would have been brought about by their religious pogroms, by the Christian pogroms against the pagans. It didn't have to be about Christians and pagans. So our games don't have to evolve into being about uh, 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 Christians or high level mythology. They can be just about your character trying to become the right hand man in arms of the Lord Alderman, right? It can be whatever, and may not take on any epic Christian, um, non-Christian struggles, right? That's just a matter of the characters. So if neither Dell or I had been playing a man of God, this might not have involved much about God at all, right? Because Dell was playing a man of God, and my character was looking for Bishop Aethelwald to heal him. It took on instantly out of the gate. Our characters and our agency sent a signal to Sam that this was going to be a little more magical. It's going to be a little more good versus evil, calling upon supernatural miracles, etc. So just who we are and how we were approaching the game cues Sam that this might be a little more high fantasy, a little more epic with miracles, and with greater metaphor. It might be greater metaphor, so to speak. So again, most games make magic literal. They make superpowers literal, but to do that, there has to be a way to institute the math in a mechanical way, right? Spider-Man, may have a certain resistances, or he may have an epic level of hit points or whatever, right? Depends on how the game handles superheroes. But what if the game didn't handle it as a epic math formula? What if the game didn't handle it as literal? It handled it through a mechanism and through a narrative tell that word is bond. What is being said is true. Whether my character sees it as visions or my character believes it literally, leave that to my character. My character, there are people who believe literally in the stories from the Bible, and there are people who believe there are figurative, metaphorical tells. There are people who believe literally that Arthur existed. They just haven't discovered who that was in history yet. And there are people who believe Arthur is a metaphor, right? And so I think it's okay to have, for your gaming to be very similar, right? There can be players who are wanting to believe they have the command of God, invoking him, and there'll be other characters that they aren't believers. They don't buy into it. And the way our game works proves maybe that this system could also work great for superhero tells, right? Telling tells of superheroes, I think. So anyway, pretty cool. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Dell, for amazing 4 sessions. And I want to thank Sam because he's going to pick up and continue to run Dark Age of Man for us. We will just start a different set of Chronicles, and we will be different characters doing a different thing. And so it's going to be great to continue to play our game as players and continue to watch Sam embrace the presenter seat as a naive narrator and find out what it's like to do this way. And I think Sam has been utterly liberated, and I think he now recognizes how this changes the role for the presenter, and it changes the table, the dynamic of what we're all getting out of gaming. And I think it's remarkable. Now, I hope I can go to sleep. I got this off my chest. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.